President Joe Biden is hosting his first summit at Camp David, and a new review calls for reforms after sexual assault at military academies. All of that and more today, August 18th, 2023. Good morning, Early Birds. I'm Zamon Perez, your host, and this is the Early Bird Brief, produced by Defense News and Military Times. For our first story today, just a heads up for listeners, the story does discuss the topic of sexual assault. The Pentagon released a study yesterday that said military academies must improve leadership, stop toxic practices, and shift behavior training into classrooms. The study was meant to address an alarming spike in sexual assaults and misconduct from earlier this year. U.S. officials said the academies must train student leaders better to help their classmates. They want to end what they view as a disconnect between what cadets and midshipmen learn in school and negative and unpunished behaviors they see by some of their mentors. The review calls for additional senior officers and enlisted leaders to work with students at the Army, Navy, and Air Force academies and provide expanded training. Several U.S. officials described the report on the condition of anonymity because it has not yet been publicly released. And an important point, the officials said that too often discussions about stress relief, misconduct, social media, and other life issues take place after hours or on the weekends. The report does recommend that those topics be addressed in classes and graded to emphasize their importance. Earlier this year, another Pentagon report showed a sharp spike in reported sexual assaults at the academies during the 2021 to 2022 school year. It said in an anonymous survey, 1 in 5 female students said that they had experienced unwanted sexual contact. The survey results were the highest since the Department of Defense began collecting that data in 2006. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin acknowledged that the academies have, quote, far more work to do to halt sexual assault and harassment. In another important story, President Joe Biden is slated to host the Japanese Prime Minister and South Korean President for a summit at Camp David today. The three countries are expected to announce plans for expanded military cooperation, and that's according to some officials who spoke to the Associated Press this week ahead of the summit. The plans have reportedly involved ballistic missile defenses and technology development as concern about North Korea's nuclear program grows. It will be Biden's first summit at Camp David, though, during his presidency, but he is not the first commander-in-chief to host foreign dignitaries there. White House Historical Association historian Sarah Fling said every president since Franklin Roosevelt has used Camp David.
FDR first used it for recreation and diplomacy, which really are the two biggest reasons that presidents have used Camp David throughout history. And he had Winston Churchill, for example, come to Camp David to talk about the Normandy invasion and what was happening during World War II.
Biden aides said the president made a deliberate choice to use the Navy-run and Marine-guarded camp, which is less imposing than the White House. And here's why it matters. This summit comes as the complicated relationship between South Korea and Japan softens. Japan colonized the Korean Peninsula from 1910 to 1945, and it also comes as both South Korea and Japan face growing regional threats and challenges from North Korea and an increasingly aggressive China. North Korea state media reported earlier this week that President Kim Jong-un ordered a large increase in production of missiles and other weapons. U.S. officials believe Russia's defense minister recently talked with North Korea about selling more weapons to Russia for its war in Ukraine. In other news, a new littoral combat ship has been decommissioned. For more on this, Navy Times senior reporter Jeff Szulewicz joins the episode today. So Jeff, in your article it says the Navy decommissioned the Sioux City. Why did the Navy decommission this ship in particular?
The Sioux City is part of a ship class known as the littoral combat ships. They were kind of conceived early in the 21st century and were envisioned as these kind of lightly armored, agile ships that could deal with kind of asymmetric threats, non-state actors, stuff like that. As the Defense Department has prepared itself for another potential conventional war with, a nation like China, the Sea Service and the Pentagon have come to the realization that these very expensive ships wouldn't survive very long in any kind of sea battle. The mission modules and the things they were supposed to do, kind of the add-ons to these ships, never materialized over the years. So the entire LCS program has been a bit of a boondoggle, to say the least, and it's, cost countless taxpayer dollars and ended up with a ship that the Navy kind of admits it can't really use in a future fight. So that brings us to USS Sioux City, which was commissioned in November of 2018 and was decommissioned this past Monday at Naval Station Mayport in Florida. Less than 5 years in active service for the ship. These ships are meant to serve, 25 years at least. But, Navy officials tell us that, the Navy has to make, difficult decisions on how to invest in the future. And, basically the unsaid thing is that the LCS won't help in a future fight against China. So why are we still throwing money at them? The ship classes have just been plagued by a bunch of different issues, from cracks in the hulls to issues with the transmissions on these ships. Sioux City is just one of several LCS that the Navy is looking to mothball a lot earlier than they plan to, just because it doesn't help in the future fight. And that's where things stand. But yeah, a lot of taxpayer dollars, a lot of time spent on this program and not much to show for it, to be frank.
Yeah, and you mentioned how it was the ship they had hedged their bet on, and now that they're rethinking that, and so they're decommissioning way earlier than expected. So what is the Navy looking to do to replace this capability that they originally put so much emphasis on?
Yeah, you've seen lawmakers refer to LCS as the little crappy ship. A little play on the LCS there. But, the thought is, next generation warships that have armor and weapons and can survive and contribute to a big naval fight. That's basically the gist of it. And you see that going in a bunch of different directions, but it's certainly not the LCS, just because it's not really armored well. It hasn't really carried a lot of weapons in the past and things like that. So, the thought is bigger, badder warships that can actually fight another navy, as opposed to these ships, which were kind of envisioned for a different time.
Thanks, Jeff. If you liked our conversation today, please like and rate us wherever you get your podcasts. And also on your radar for today, the Pentagon announced that groundwater treatment systems will be installed near a military base in northern Michigan to address contamination from high levels of what they call toxic forever chemicals. 2 systems will be deployed to address the spread of perfluoroalkyl and polyfluoroalkyl. Those chemicals are called PFAS and were found in groundwater near the former Wurtsmith Air Force Base in Oscoda, Michigan. The base is located on Lake Huron, and it closed in 1993. PFAS chemicals are a group of compounds that are widespread, dangerous, and expensive to remove from water. They don't degrade in the environment and are also linked to a broad range of health issues. That includes low birth weights and kidney cancer. The announcement comes close to 2 years after an environmental group released Pentagon records that PFAS had contaminated groundwater near at least 6 military sites in the Great Lakes region. Department records showed PFAS had been detected at levels up to 213,000 parts per trillion at the Lake Huron base. To put that into context, the Environmental Protection Agency in March proposed strict limits of 4 parts per trillion for 2 common types of PFAS compounds. A government study released in July found drinking water from nearly half of U.S. faucets likely contained PFAS. The Department of Defense said in a statement that the 2 systems would expedite the cleanup of the department's contamination. They are also expected to help prevent the impacted water from migrating. The chemicals have been used since the 1940s in consumer products and industry, including nonstick pans, food packaging, and firefighting foam. Their use is now mostly phased out in the U.S., but some still remain. And now here's some other stories that we're hearing chirps about. The Air Force has confirmed a Mississippi man arrested for participating in the January 6th Capitol riot is a reservist. Federal prosecutors say David Scott Stapp was part of the mob that stormed the Capitol that day. Military.com reported that this year, 17 personnel have died at Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma, but Air Force officials have reportedly refused to say what the causes of those deaths were. They cited concerns for families and units on base as the reason not to say. The Pentagon and FBI have advised families of some of the thousands killed in the 9/11 attacks that the suspected architect and his fellow defendants may never face the death penalty. That's because of plea agreements now under consideration to bring an end to their more than decade-long prosecution. Thousands of the U.S. military's aerial reconnaissance pictures of England during World War II were published online for the first time earlier this week. And we gotta clear up some false information that has been circulating on the internet. A claim that the Marine Corps arrested Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla and killed his bodyguards is false. Pfizer confirmed Bourla was not arrested. The claim was made in a post by a website that says it publishes, quote, humor, parody, and satire. It has previously published similar false stories. The site has since taken the post down. And on this day in history, in 1838, 6 U.S. Navy ships departed Virginia on a 3-year mission called the U.S. South Seas Exploring Expedition. The XX was America's most ambitious expedition of exploration. The officers charted 1,500 miles of the Antarctic coast for the first time. That's it for us this morning. To get more top stories and breaking news, go to defensenews.com/EBB to subscribe to the Early Bird Brief newsletter. Please give us a like, rating, and a comment wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to follow us on social media at @defense_news and @military times. The Early Bird Brief is hosted and produced by me, Zamon Z. Perez. Today's episode features stories by the Associated Press and Jeff Zazulowicz. Our editor-in-chief is Mike Bruce. Have a great day.